This is a real interesting story that I came across. I have no personal involvement with this, but I thought it'd be worth repeating. And I'll put the link in the description so you can read the whole story. But it's about Les Paul. He used to live in Mahwah, New Jersey, and evidently one night it was snowing, and he needed to get out of his driveway the next day, and he called the police department to see if they had a phone number for somebody who could plow the driveway. And this young guy answered, and he said, I can come out in an hour and plow it for you. And that started his whole relationship. And I'll let him tell his story, because at the end of this, I'll put the video of him being interviewed about the whole thing rather than repeat myself. But the one thing he doesn't say on the video is he knew Les Paul for 29 years. And over the 29 years, they became really good friends. When he first met Les Paul, didn't know who he was, didn't know his music, didn't know anything about him. And over the years, they became really, really good friends. But the most interesting thing about this story is if you read at the end of the article, Les Paul was very concerned about when he passed away, what's going to happen with all his the gear there, because he didn't want people just selling it off to buy themselves a new yacht, he was saying. And this guy, his name is Jim Wysocki. I think that's it. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. But him and he talked to Les Paul, and he told him, how about this? Everything that you gave me for the last 20, 25 years, when you pass away, I'll make sure that people can touch it and feel it and play with it, so they know firsthand what it was to use some of your equipment. And Les Paul loved that idea. And they said, okay, let's make that happen. So instead of me repeating everything that he's saying, there's some pictures in the background while I'm talking of this guy with the guitars that Les Paul had given him. And then right after this is the video. And I just think it's fascinating, and it's just a lovely story. And I just have a deep admiration for Les Paul, and it just seemed like his spirit of him came through in this story. What a nice guy, and an innovator, and just seemed like a good person. So there you go.
I met Les Paul. I met him in 1981. I joined the police department in October, and I was working the desk on a December evening. And I was assigned to desk duty, and I was working with an older lieutenant. And the phone rang. And the lieutenant said to me, Jimmy, answer the phone, rookie. So I picked the phone up. It was about 11 o'clock at night. It was snowing out. And I picked the phone up and I said, Mahwah Police. And the voice on the other end said, howdy, this is Les Paul. Now, I was just out of high school. I didn't play a musical instrument. I didn't own a guitar. And I didn't know who Les Paul was from the janitor working in our police department. So I asked him, I said, what can I do for you? And he said, I have to get out of the driveway early tomorrow morning. And I was wondering if you knew of anyone, or you can give me a phone number of someone with a snowplow, might be able to plow my driveway. And I said, if it can wait till, midnight, another hour, I get out, I'll swing over and do your driveway. So I plowed his driveway, and I thought that was the end of it. And about a week later, I was home, and the phone rang, and it was a lady, and she said her name was Arlene Palmer, and she was at Les Paul's house, and he'd like to see me. And I said, it's not necessary. She said, no, he insists. So I went over to Les's house. I knocked on, 8 doors before someone actually answered. And right away, I was hit with this aroma, and it wasn't a stench. It was an old house smell. So the door opened, Arlene introduced herself, and I noticed the door was about 8 inches thick. So as I walked into the house, I noticed clutter everywhere, boxes, and I looked down the end of the room, the patio, into the kitchen. There was a little old man sitting behind the counter with a guitar. And he looked up and he said, howdy, you must be Jim. I said, I am. He walked around the corner and put the guitar down. He went to shake my hand with his left hand. And I said, it's nice to meet you. He said, thank you for plowing my driveway. He goes, I want to give you something for doing that. I said, you don't have to. And he said, no, I have to. So he went on the counter and he picked up these cassettes. And he said, here, I want to give you my cassettes. This is my music, and I want you to listen to it. I figured he liked the music. I still didn't know who he was. And I said, that's nice. Then he said, do you play the guitar? I said, no, I don't play the guitar. So he went in the back room and came out with this guitar. And he said, take the guitar. And he wrote on the back of a receipt 3 chords, an E, A, and a D chord. And he showed me how to finger them on the fretboard. And he said, in a week, come back and just show me that you know how to play the guitar. So I said, that's cool. I'll be back. He said, before you go, he goes, I have something else for you. He said, I want you on a special day to open this bottle of champagne. So I said, all right, that's cool. He said, well, take the sock off. So I took the sock off, and right away it said, it's Krug. And on the back it said, especially selected by British Airways. And he wrote on it, to my pal from Les Paul, Jim. So I said, what's so big about the bottle? He said, just promise me on a special day you'll open it. And I said, but what's so big about it? He said, a bunch of years ago, I got a phone call from the airline, and they wanted me to go on a plane ride. And they said everybody was going to go. Said Eric, Jeff, Paul. I said, who? He goes, Eric Clapton, Jeff Beck, Paul McCartney. And I said, and you want me to open this bottle? On a special day, do that. So when I left his house, first place I went was a library, because back in the 80s, we didn't have the internet. And I opened up an encyclopedia, and the encyclopedia said name Les Paul. Next to it, in parentheses, it said Lester Pulfus. I said, I read it, inventor of the electric. I said, that's not him. So I went to another book, and Les Paul, Lester Pulfus, but it had a picture, and it was him. And I read about an hour and a half these different books about him. And when I went back the next week, I kind of had an idea who he was. So when I knocked on the door, he let me in. I had the guitar, and he didn't give it to me in a case. He just handed it to me like that. So when I went back, the first thing he said, Jimmy, did you learn those chords? I said, yeah. So I picked the guitar up, and he goes, let me see what you got. So I said, E, A, D. He's like, good. He goes, too fast. Slow down. He goes, everything's too fast. So he took the guitar, and he was standing behind the counter, and his back was to me. And I said, Les, I read about you. I said, everything about you is Gibson. You designed their guitar back in the 30s and 40s. You were signed by them, endorsed by them to play their guitars. And I said, what's with this Danny Electro guitar? He's like, it's pronounced Dan Electro. And still his back was to me. He said, Nathaniel Daniels, the owner of Dan Electro, gave it to me as a present, and it was a prototype. He goes, and I want to give it to you now. And I said, you can't do that because it's a gift. He goes, no, you take it, you play it, and put it under your bed for a rainy day. He turned around, and I said, I'm not going to take it. He said, it's too late. I said, why? He said, because I already got your name on it. And that was the very first Les Paul guitar that I got from Les, the Dan Electro. It's a 1960 model, and that's something I cherish forever. And that was the beginning of a 29-year relationship with Les Paul.